Welcome to our webinar on culture, sponsored by the Culture Audit. As always, I'm joined by Sam Silverstein. Sam, welcome back.
Hey, Tom, great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Sam, today we're going to take a step back and try to figure out or give a definition or put some parameters around culture. Your background is you've been a businessman, you've been a Hall of Fame speaker, or you are a Hall of Fame speaker. You've been a consultant for 15 or 20 years, helping companies in this area. What do you see that a company's culture consists of, or maybe how would you help a company define culture?
After 30 years of working with organizations, helping them be the best they can be, we look at culture as simply this. It's what's accepted and repeated. So whatever is accepted and repeated inside your organization, that's your culture. People show up when they want to show up. That's accepted and repeated. That's your culture. If people are allowed to disrespect people in the organization, that's accepted and repeated, meaning if it's accepted that these people are allowed to stay, then that's part of your culture. All organizations have a culture. Every organization has a culture. It's either a culture by design or a culture by default. And our goal in working with leaders is to help them move from a culture by default to a culture by design.
Sam, a culture by design implies to me that there's a way to study it, there's a way to learn about it, there's a way to assess it, and then there's a way to put a strategy around it to design a program that you want to put in place. Would those be fair assessments from your perspective?
Absolutely. You nailed it. All of those are in play.
Sam, as the Department of Justice has said, they're going to look at culture in terms of any company that becomes in front of them in an enforcement action. And one of the biggest things they talk about are people willing to raise their hand and speak up, whether that speak up be in a hotline, whether it be in an anonymous reporting system, whether it be to go into their direct manager's office and say, I would like to tell you about something, whether it could be to pick up the phone and call HR, call compliance, or call legal. Where do you see trust as a part of overall culture?
It's interesting. I was talking to someone that I'd case studied their organization at one point in time, and I asked him, the CEO, the president of the organization, I asked, do you have a chief compliance officer? Now, this was a smaller company. They only had about 125 employees, but they had a tremendous number of trade that they brought in, subcontractors, to do the work. And they were a very large organization. And when I asked that question, he looked at me and he shrugged. He's like, why would you even ask that question? And then his response was, all of us. And so, in other words, everyone in the organization is involved in ethics in the organization. They trust each other to make the right decisions. They trust each other to make decisions that are in each other's best interest. They trust each other to live the values of the organization. They trust each other to step everything out with honesty and integrity. So trust is really important. And trust is something that is created based on a track record, so that when you, especially as a new employee, when you come into an organization, who knows what experience you have in the past, but when all of a sudden you see how people work together here, that they care about each other, they trust each other, that people are making decisions that aren't necessarily in their individual best interest, but the best interest of everyone, then you take that on and you take on that trust, and it becomes very powerful.
Sam, how do you communicate culture throughout an organization? For instance, is that an employee orientation? Is it at your year-end review? Is it when the CEO speaks to a group of employees? Is it in some sort of town hall? Is it in an email? All of the above or none of the above, maybe?
So I can make your job very difficult, Tom, and just say yes and leave it at that. Yes, all of the above. First of all, I want to pull out annual review. I hate annual reviews. I think all annual reviews do is tick off good people. If I do something that's not right, I want to know now. If you don't address that now, then you're going to have 6 more months of me making the same kind of decision. That's not smart. And when you do bring something up in an annual review, the individual doesn't remember doing it in the first place. So they're just getting frustrated. I think if we meet annually, meeting annually should be to talk about goals and objectives. How can you help me grow, be the best person I can be? Because then I'm going to be the best for the organization. That's a sidebar. As far as all these areas, when it comes to culture, the conversation on culture should start at the first job interview and should never end. And so the word culture should constantly be used throughout the organization. Oh, we don't do that in our culture, or we do this in our culture. In our culture, we do this. Everything should be continuously tied to culture so that there is an awareness in everyone, not just the leader, senior leader, not just mid-level leader, literally everyone in the organization. Around here, our culture is important. I play a role in that culture, and my actions are either going to defend the culture or erode the culture. So it's everywhere, it's constant, it never stops.
Let's focus on senior management because I think, if not a truism, one of the things that is said the most in my world is that it all starts at the top, or tone at the top. But I've heard you talk about this topic from time to time, and you really seem to advocate, Tom, it's not tone. It's something much deeper and much more encompassing. And you've started to talk about that a little bit, but I wanted to maybe ask you to take a deep dive into really what top management needs to do themselves, not just set tone.
Leadership. And I like to talk about leadership versus management because I believe you manage things, you lead people. I know I'm all about the words, Tom. I think it comes down to the values. And in particular, do we value people? If senior leadership truly values people and people feel valued, then everyone's going to make different decisions and you're going to get different results. And that's not something that is, you can't fake that. Do you really care about people? And when people know you care about them, they want to do a good job. And that's what you want to build within an organization. The greatest workplace cultures I've ever been associated with, either in case studies, either in helping them make that transformation, observing them, living them, senior leadership always cared about their people, knew it, and their people would have rather died than let leadership down. And when someone feels that way, that's when they're in there early. That's when they're in there late. That's when they make sure the job is done and it's done right. And that's what we want. We want a team of people that really care about what they're doing. So yes, it starts at the top. What is it? It, to me, is caring about your people, valuing them as human beings, wanting the best for them. And if the best for an individual is not the best for the organization, maybe you need to help that person achieve that best, even if it means they're leaving the organization. And let me tell you, when you help someone improve their life and their journey, and it takes them outside of your organization, everyone sees that and they know the level of sincerity and care that you have. And then they really buy in. So I believe it starts with caring about people. And then you layer onto that a set of values that are about people, not policies, but about people, a positive standards that respect the rights of people and are absolute. When you layer those values in and then you live those yourself as a leader, and then you make sure that everyone in the organization lives it and you protect the culture by not allowing people to stay who aren't living those values, that's where people want to come. That's where people want to stay. And that's evidence of the highest performing organizations, both in terms of culture, but also in the bottom line.
Sam, there's another group in a organization that we have not touched on, and that's the board of directors, although you may see that as leadership. Legally, they have a different obligation than management. They don't typically involve themselves in tactical day to day. They may set an overall parameter. But if you were counseling a board of directors, how would you counsel them around their role in fostering culture?
I sat in a meeting once, the board of directors of an organization, and they were reviewing the strategic plan. And there were 9 items on the strategic plan. The first item, point one, at the top of the list was protect and defend the culture. They realized that the performance that they were enjoying, and they had 30 31 years of incredible performance, all came back to their culture. So a lot of times we see boards that are trying to maximize the bottom line, and they don't understand that to get the greatest return on the bottom line, we need to have the greatest culture. And it's when those leaders come together and say, we have to maintain this culture, and they make sure that all their decisions align with the culture, which the culture is defined by the values. So all the decisions are aligned with the values. Then it literally starts at the top. And so I want a board of directors that understands the value of culture, that understands the culture. When you're bringing in outside executives and outside talent to be on the board, they need to understand the culture just as much as the CEO and just as much as that mid-level leader that you just hired. Because if you don't truly understand the culture, you can't live the culture. So it does start at the board level.
We've talked about leadership.
There's one other thing. I hate to
Okay.
interrupt you, but I want to go to this because we see culture change when leadership changes in an organization. So a president of a large organization retires, someone else comes in, maybe they went outside, who knows? Whether or not that culture stays where it was is going to be a reflection of what the board did in the process of replacing that senior leader. If the culture just lives in the president, you're going to have a problem. But if the culture lives in the board, then the board is able to maintain that continuity in the organization because they're going to hire that new CEO based on the CEO's ability to understand and lead their unique culture.
We've talked about leadership, we've talked about management, but I'd like to move down into the organization to middle management and even below middle management. How do you help those employees understand their roles in maintaining the type of culture that we've discussed?
It's an old phrase, lead by example. And leaders at all levels are looking at the leader above them. That's where they're looking. And you're promoting people a lot of times that the lowest level leader is someone that was great at the job. So they get promoted into some leadership position, even though they don't know anything about leadership. Well, are you training them? Are you setting the right example? Does senior leadership require that every level of leadership has the same view of valuing people and living the values of the organization? Because if there's a disconnect between the top and the bottom, then what happens is things at the bottom aren't going to work properly. So I believe that you're always training leadership. You're developing leadership. You're helping them be the best possible that they can be. And this understanding of culture and the values that drive the culture go from top to bottom. So that in essence, this front level of leadership, they really don't have a choice. They have to step out the company directive, which is these are our values. We live them here. This defines our culture. We're going to fight to protect our culture. And it becomes a way of life here inside this organization.
Sam, in 2019, the Business Roundtable, in a document called Statement on the Purpose of a Business Corporation, identified 5 stakeholder groups that every corporation has. Not obviously shareholders are stakeholders, but employees are stakeholders, customers are stakeholders, localities where you either do business or take raw materials from are stakeholders, and those you do business with are stakeholders, third parties, suppliers. Can these values be utilized and shared throughout those myriad of relationships that every corporation has?
So that's the key. So let's make this simple. Let's say we value integrity. What does that mean here? We need to define it. We can't just use the word, because if you just use a word, we all define these words differently. Even though they might be similar, they're different. So first of all, that value needs to be defined into 3, 4, 5, 6-word paragraph. Now, if we really value integrity, does that mean we just value integrity with the shareholders, or we only want to be integrous with the employees, but not our suppliers? Or we want integrity with our suppliers, but we don't care about our employees? No. If this is truly a value, then we believe this. If we believe it, it shows up in our actions, all of our actions, no matter who the relationship is with, no matter which one of those groups that you mentioned. And that's when the culture is well defined. It's the values that are being lived that defines the culture. And it's with everyone we come in contact with, because right is right and wrong is wrong. And just because you may or may not impact the bottom line, or you may have purchased something or you didn't purchase something, that doesn't change whether something is right or wrong.
You've mentioned several times the actions you take, but also when we started our conversation today, you mentioned your actions which are repeated. So I think the phrase I wrote down was it what's accepted and what is repeated. Can I ask you to focus on the repeated part? And how does that really help shape culture in addition to what's accepted?
Anything that's repeated over and over again is going to have an impact. That impact can be positive, that impact can be negative. And so if someone is disrespecting the support team over and over and over and over again, that's a negative occurrence, and it's just repeating and it's being ingrained, and several things are happening. One, we're teaching others that you can disrespect people in the organization. Maybe it's based on performance. If you perform well, you can disrespect others. And then we're teaching a group of people also that they can be disrespected and they don't matter. And so why would we allow that to go on? Now, you think about this. I know an organization where I asked a room of 500 CEOs once, do you have anybody negative working in your organization? And 299 hands went up. 290, one hand didn't go up. And the CEO of this organization, his hand didn't go up. And I said, your hand didn't go up. And he says, no, one of our values is positive attitude. We don't allow people to stay in an organization if they don't have a positive attitude, which means if you come to work and you're negative, you're going to get counseled. What's going on in your lifetime? What's happening? How can I help you? A meaningful conversation. And at some point, someone's going to say, Tom, around here, we just don't grumble and we're not negative. If you can't come around to that, then we're going to have to allow you to go someplace where that kind of behavior is acceptable. So I say that because you have the ability as a leader to define your culture. You have the ability to say what is going to be accepted and repeated over and over again. And hopefully what's repeated are positive actions, not negative actions. If we allow the negative actions to be repeated, then I would say we're not being a good leader.
Sam, if you have culture being talked about by leadership, does that allow or foster a culture where employees are looking to the top for leadership as opposed to the individual employees are living the values every day? Or is that something that really is not a concern?
I'm not sure I understand what that question is, but to me, leadership should always be talking about the culture and about the values. And when you as an employee see that's important to them, it only makes sense that it better be important to you if you're going to be around for any length of time. So then it becomes everyone talking about it. But the leader protects the culture for the people. I'll give you an example. Have you ever fired somebody?
Yes.
Okay. So I ask this question of leaders all the time. We know the answer. The answer is yes. Then I go, I'm willing to wager that within a day, maybe 12 hours, maybe 5 hours, but certainly within a day or a day and a half, somebody comes into your office and they'll go, Tom, what took you so
Long?
Exactly. You let this guy or this gal stay around, which made the culture bad for me. So when you let that individual go that is caustic to the culture, you are in fact protecting the culture for everyone. And so it is leadership's responsibility. They set the pace, but every level below that picks up on that and they lead the same way. So it's imperative that we have strong values-based leadership because your culture is defined by your values. Now, here's the part that people don't like to hear. But let's just be honest. First of all, action follows belief. Now, when I grew up, my father must have said 50,000 times. And you probably heard this too. Actions speak louder than words. That's saying the same thing. If you allow someone to stay in the company that disrespects people, then you're saying it's okay to disrespect people. If you're the top salesperson, if your numbers justify it, you can talk any way you want around here. Now, is that the kind of organization you want? If so, that's fine. Just let people know on the way in. Here's how it works here. If you produce enough in our organization, you can act any way you want. That's our culture. At least make it one by design. Most good people don't want to be associated in that type of culture, because that one good person that you are afraid to fire is going to ruin it for everyone else. And when you get rid of that one person, everyone else raises their level of standard and of performance, because they go, oh my gosh, look, Tom didn't let Sally or Jim stay around. He must believe that we can take up the slack. And then they start working harder because you're creating and protecting a culture for them. Starts at the top, works its way down.
And I want to end by flipping that last statement, starts at the top and works its way down up. I want to flip that to ask you, how can those at the bottom really help sustain, if not influence, culture on the way up? Or do things just not work like that?
Everyone has a role in the culture, but it's their responsibility to live the culture. But the number one question that I'm always asked by individuals who are not senior leaders is, what happens if my leader, if the person I report to isn't living the culture? Now, that is a statement unto itself, Tom. And that's what senior leadership cannot allow to happen. Senior leadership has to have a relationship with their people to know that everyone in the organization is stepping out that culture. And so if I report to you, not only do you need to see what I'm doing, the person below me, but I need to know it's so important to you that I got to see what the person below me and the person below them is doing. And they know it's so important. And so it trickles down. And people have to have a way to communicate when things aren't going right. And that's one of the advantages of the cultural audit, is it allows people to communicate that things aren't being done right, and we need to stop and assess the situation.
Sam, we were near the end of our time for this month's webinar, but I really enjoyed our chat around culture. I hope our listeners will have enjoyed it as much as well. We've linked to the culture audit, which assesses culture, and we've also linked to a scheduling app, which allows people who want to follow up with either Sam or I or both about the culture audit. Sam, I look forward to our next visit together.
Absolutely. Can't wait. This is an important conversation for all leaders.